Hello, everyone. Hello.
You just pressed the button.
Hi, Chanel. Hi, Cheryl, PhD. Hello, everyone. So we're going to wait a second for people to join us. Hi, Khadijah. Hello. We are excited. Wait a few seconds. Hey, Adelia. Hey.
Hi, Khadijah. Hi, Benita.
Hey, Benita. Okay, so we have enough people in here to get started. All right. So this is our debut, right? Our first Read and Wander chat with our first guest, Arthur. But first, let's tell you a little about who we are. We are Read and Wander Book Club. We started last October, Kiyoka and I, as readers and authors, wanted to create a space for Black women writers, Black women readers, just to take some time and read the collection of books that are sitting on your counter that you don't have time to read. Basically, that was our goal. But while we were brainstorming what we wanted this space to be about, inviting professional, badass Black women writers to engage with our members was always one of the pillars. And it took us a few months to get our engagement and our interaction up to the point where we thought it was time to do that. And so, with that, I wanted to think about the kind of writers that we want to introduce you to in case you hadn't known them, who we want you to interact with, who we want to bring to the forefront to highlight because of their craft, because of how well they write, because of the intention behind their writing. And when I thought about all that, this person was one of the top people who I knew I wanted to invite. I want to read her official intro first. Well, let me back up. I'm Yvonne McBride. I should start with that, right? I'm Yvonne McBride with Yvonne McBride Lit Life, and my co-host is...
I'm Kiyoka, the Awkward Black Nomad. Hi, y'all.
Hey, we are the co-hosts for Read and Wander. So with that, let me go ahead and read our esteemed guest bio. Destiny O. Birdsong is a writer whose work has appeared in the Paris Review Daily, Poets and Writers, African American Review, the Best American Poetry, and elsewhere. She has received support from Cave Canem, Callaloo, Jack Jones Literary Arts, Pink Door McDowell, the Ragdow Foundation, and Tin House. Her poetry debut collection, Negotiations, was published by Tin House Books in 2020, and her debut triptych novel, Nobody's Magic, was published by Grand Central in 2022. It was longlisted for the Centers for Fiction's first novel prize. It was a finalist for the Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence, and it won the 2022 William Morris Award for Southern Fiction. So, Destiny O. Birdsong, welcome to our little reading nook online.
Thank you for having me.
We are excited.
We're excited.
We are excited. Thank you, Thriving in Enough. Thank you, Tori, Kicking It with Kim. We are so excited to have you here to discuss Nobody's Magic. I read it when it came out. I bought and read it when it came out. I reread it with the group to refresh my memory of all the stories. But again, when thinking about who I wanted to present, who I wanted to invite here to talk to us, you were one of those people because of your expertise, because of how long you've been in the game, because of your bravery when writing, your brave prose, your brave stances, And yeah, so we are happy to have you, and I'm excited and grateful that you said yes to our request.
Oh, thank you. It was a yes the moment I saw your message. Um, so yeah, I, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, thank you. So for all of you in the group, Kiyoka and I are going to try to rein you all in. We're going to start by discussing the overall arc of the book, but if you have questions about the book specifically, please put them in the chat with the Q in front of them so that we could keep track of those questions. And then later on, if we have time, we'll open it up to general writing questions for those of you who have questions about her writing life, or the writing life in general. We'll have a general Q&A about that. Okay? So, Kiyoka, do you want to kick off with one of your questions, or do you want me to?
I'll kick off. This is one that I didn't send. So I think it'll help the readers and also like the viewers to have just a little bit of background information. So because I received this question, so I'm from Metairie, Louisiana, just outside of New Orleans, which is completely different than Shreveport. But I was asked, and I'm not calling anybody out, but I was asked, why don't they have Creole or New Orleans accents, which is not Creole, but why don't they have New Orleans accents in the book? So could you talk to the people a little bit about Shreveport, Louisiana, and why you decided to center that as the setting of these stories?
Mm. Thank you. I think that's a good question. And interestingly enough, I have never been asked that. Even though typically when I tell people where I'm from, they're like, how close is it to New Orleans? And I'm like, actually, it's not close at all. So I would say, I don't know. So you're from there too. So correct me. Maybe I would say 5 hours drive, maybe something thereabouts. Yeah, I haven't made that drive in decades, so I can't tell you, but it's I think it's only slightly closer. New Orleans is only slightly closer to Shreveport than Memphis, right? So think about that. So like Memphis, which is on the other side of Arkansas, Shreveport, which is like right in the corner of Louisiana. It's actually in a region called the Arklatex because it's the little place where Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas all meet. Um, and so thinking about that, like you can get to Memphis in slightly more time than you can get to New Orleans. So in terms of like physical distance, right? Like it's not in its proximity. And Louisiana is such a diverse state. Like it's certainly not a huge state, but it's so culturally diverse. Like South Louisiana culture, in my opinion, is different from North Louisiana culture. I mean, we have some of the same things. We have Mardi Gras parades. We have like seafood. We have, you know what I mean? Like there are Catholic influences and things like that, but it's also very much like a deep South city, right? And because like the Acadians settled in South Louisiana, because you have New Orleans, I think is just a world unto itself. When I was in grad school, somebody described New Orleans as the northernmost city in the Caribbean. Like it is it is another world.
True. True.
So that's why, right? Because Louisiana is not monolithic, just like Black culture is not monolithic, just like the South is not monolithic. Right now I live in Appalachia, and I kid you not, it feels like a different world. I'm like, I am not from here. It is obvious to me everywhere I go, every food I eat, every time I try to enjoy something like seafood, like, I'm just like, this is not the same, even though technically it's still the South. And so, like if we think about that regionally, we can also think about that in terms of the states. Like, not a huge expert on this, but Savannah, Georgia feels very different from Atlanta, Georgia,
Yes.
right? Like, and so that's what it is. It's that Shreveport. It's in the northwest corner of the state. New Orleans is in the southeast corner of the state, and physically they are relatively far apart, but culturally they're worlds apart, right? Like we don't have the placards that are in French, or you know what I mean? Like we don't have those large populations of Cajun folks, right? Like so the culture is different, and it's shaped by it's shaped by the people who settled there and who built lives there. Yeah. I don't know what the stats are for New Orleans, but I was looking these up the other day because I was telling my mom about the city I live in and the number of Black people here. And um, um, Shreveport is 55% African American, which I think is amazing. Right, like,
Yeah.
yeah, and and those are Southern Black people. Some of them are from New Orleans because there's certainly displacement, also with Katrina, right? But those are deep South Black people, and so they are the influence of the accents, the dialects, the ways that people interact with each other in that book. So, yeah.
I appreciate this book. One reason because I love books that highlight and essentially make the city, right, a character. And you do that. You actually, your dedication simply says for my city, right? So we get a lot of New Orleans stories, we get a lot of Mississippi stories, we get a lot of even like current day Atlanta stories. But one thing I appreciated about this is about Shreveport. Throughout these three stories, you get to look at the area in like varied ways, from the socioeconomic levels, the cast, all of that. We have characters who are from the hood adjacent, even in relation to Agnes, essentially homeless, like all of these characters. She's homeless. Y'all, that girl's homeless.
Don't draw a good sis like that. Hold on.
But
we're starting off wrong.
We get to see Shreveport from a person who has lived there and loved it through their eyes, right? So talk about why, for you, why was that important?
That's a good question. I think what I've learned over the years is that I can't really write about a place until after I leave it. I don't know what that is. Like the book, one of the books, I've got books out on submission right now, and one of them is set in Nashville, which is the city I lived in for like off and on for like 20 years. I had never set a book in Nashville until I moved here, which is about 3 hours east of Nashville. So I think that I don't know what that is. I do know that it takes me a long time to process things. So like it takes me a long time to process my experiences, or like a bit of news, or like the things that happen to me over the course of the day, even conversations sometimes. And so I started writing this book when I was living in Nashville. It was the summer of 2019, I believe. What is time? I feel like the pandemic has messed up my concept of time. It was the summer of 2019. And I had lived in Nashville by then, off and on for almost 20 years. Yeah. Oh, wow. So, okay. And the book started with Agnes's story. So Agnes is in Utah when her story begins. And that is because I had been doing, so that summer I did, like AP grading for a company that you all sit in a big room. I mean, well, if you read the book, the way Agnes describes that experience is exactly what it is. You sit in a big room with a bunch of other people and you grade high school AP exams for AP credit. So I was walking back so actually, honestly, I was living in Nashville, but I was physically in Utah when the concept of the book started. And I was walking back to the hotel from the convention center, which is where the testing site was. And I kept thinking like the first line of her story, which is like, Agnes Cherie Kirkendall always panicked a little bit when she wrote her name in perfect capital letters and blocks at the top of a Scantron. Like that first sentence just came to me as I was walking. And I was like, it's interesting.
Wow.
I was doing something. Yeah, I was doing something else at the moment. And I got back home and I was just like, man, that sentence like kept coming back to me. And I was like, all right, fine. I'm gonna write a short story. I'm gonna get this out of my system and I'm gonna be done with it. And that's how it started. Initially, Agnes does not go back home, right? Okay. In the first iteration of it.
But then by the end of the story, she wasn't at home?
No, she was not. The story ends when Prime asks her to get into the car. That's when her story initially ended. That's the way it was sold, was the book. Yeah. And then my editor was like, I think she needs to go home. And I was like, damn it. because that had been in the back of my mind the whole time. I knew when she said it, I knew she was right, but I was mad because that meant I had to, and I had like another several dozen pages to write. But I think that she was right in the sense that like so much of Agnes's trauma happens in her home space, and I think in order for her to heal, she has to go back. The other women, Suzette and Maple, I think they were. I wanted to set them in a place where, even though they are both in sort of precarious situations in terms of life, like Suzette is really being like sheltered almost to the point of abuse by her father. And Maple has lost her mother. I wanted them to find their way through in a place where they felt safe. And like, Shreveport feels like a safe place for me emotionally. That's where my people are. It's where my mom is. You know what I mean? Like that's the place that made me, even though technically at this point I've lived in other places longer than I've lived there. But that place was so integral to like the making of who I am. And I think for all of these women, these stories are about making themselves, remaking themselves, right? Figuring out, in Suzette's case, figuring out who she is, maybe for the first time. And then for Maple and Agnes, sort of figuring out who they are in the aftermath of these really traumatic events. And that place, because it feels like a safe place for me. And also because I think it's culturally rich and interesting, right? Like everybody wants a story set in New York. Everybody wants a story set in some large city. But the culture of this country really comes from these little like pockets of places that we often overlook. You know what I mean? And for me, and I've overlooked them. Sometimes I don't appreciate them until I get to places where I'm like, oh my God, I miss, like living here. There's this very specific kind of Black community that I miss, of like Black people that I miss. Like Deep South Black people are a very specific kind of people. And I love those people. Like, I love being around them. I feel safe around them. They know how to cook. Like, I mean, like, you know what I mean?
But that goes into what you said about like you couldn't write about that or maybe fully appreciate it until you leave it, right? So then while you were in Nashville, you were thinking like, I miss these people, and it brings up like the textures, right? What do you think about it? Even like the minute things like the street corners and the people and the language, like all of that, like that's what makes our lives rich, right? So when you bring those elements into a book, a story, that's what makes it so much better.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, like the nuance of it. Like I don't know that we need many more books set in, these places that we always sort of see. It's not that they're bad books, it's just that there are other interesting places in this country. And, I think the Deep South like has given so much to the culture of this place. Like, and so it feels like a privilege to be able to write about it and to have lived there and have been shaped by it. So yeah, I think it was a really organic choice. I didn't necessarily sit down and say like, I want these people here and I want these things to happen. It really was an exploration of these women's lives and like, well, who are they? And I think who they are ultimately dictated where they were from and where they returned to. Yeah.
So to that point, my question is like, they say through every narrative, there's a problem trying to be solved, right? There's a problem to highlight. That's where stories have come from. So when you sat down, you said you started with Agnes, but when you sat down and thought about writing this 3-part novel, what were the issues that you wanted to write about? Aside from getting into the albinism, people living with albinism, aside from that aspect, like on a large scale, what were you looking to explore in this book?
I think starting with Agnes, it was definitely about money. And it was, it's like, how does economic stability impact your sense of self, and your sense of what's possible, right? Because I think Agnes had gotten to a place where she really just didn't see any other possibilities. I think that's why she like lashes out in that moment, because she just realized she feels like she doesn't really have anything else to lose. And she's frustrated and she's angry. And so I think that's the problem that I was trying to solve with her. I think, you know, in Suzette's case, it's just the opposite. She has so much of everything. She has everything except her autonomy. And so the problem becomes how do I become autonomous, even though I need these people? Like I need, you know what I mean? Like
Right. She was
I
still
need my,
young. Right.
yeah, I need my parents. I mean, she has a skill. She hasn't learned how to market it, or like, you know, like she's still sort of figuring out what she wants that to look like as an adult. And so I think that's her problem. And then in Maple's case, it's like, what do you do when you lose the person who really defines who you are? Like, I think that Maple and her mother's relationship is really beautiful. But I think in a lot of ways it really prevents Maple from her own self-actualization, because her entire being is sort of filtered through her mother's lens, which is good because her mom loves her and thinks the world of her, but she never really gets the chance to like be herself, or to live in a world that is sort of unshaped by her mother's really large personality. And so I think Maple's problem becomes, who am I in the wake of this loss? Who am I without my mother?
I wonder too if all the characters in a way are struggling with their identity. I think in a lot of ways we see them kind of interrogate, who am I? What do I want? What makes me happy? And I feel like that's why I would say Maple and Agnes's stories really resonated with me, because I think like being a woman and having your own autonomy, having your own agency is something that you have to almost build towards, because for a lot of women, we've been conditioned to be nice, you know, not or ladylike, or especially I would say especially in the South, right? Like there's this idea about what a woman is and how a woman should present, and I think the shoulds weigh us down a lot. So then you get to this place where you're like in your, you know, maybe you're in your 20s or your 30s, and you're kind of figuring out, is this a should that I want? You know, is this a life that I've built that I enjoy? And I think in different ways we see each of the characters kind of going through their own process of figuring out for themselves what they want.
Right.
I can't highlight a comment, but I love what Thriving on Enough says. I really appreciate how you ended Suzette's self-discovery journey. She became liberated within her family structure. I love that too. I was like, girl, try some things, okay? Try some things. Do a little bit of everything, okay?
That's when you're supposed to, when you're young and tender.
Not tender.
Okay. That's a good point. Very true.
I also want to talk about sex. So we were talking a little bit before about how you've been able to use place in a very interesting way, and I would want to add to that. I think there are so many stories that come out about New Orleans specifically, or a lot of these other big major cities. It's almost as if we're trying to uphold an idea that a city is whatever in the media we think it is, right? So like, what are the components of a New Orleans story? Jazz, okay. Somebody is upset about Katrina, you know, whatever it is.
Bourbon
right?
Street.
Bourbon Street. Like we all have these things that we think are New Orleans. And so we're painting a picture in our minds. And so because there isn't a lot of material about Shreveport specifically, you kind of don't have to adhere to that. You can kind of create the city in an image of your choosing. With that being said, I think there's a lot of respectability that comes into place when you are trying to uphold this image of your city. You want to talk about the acceptable parts of a city, whereas I feel like you kind of jump right in with people at the margins, right? Like, so the people who live in the hood, the people who got shut down by drive-by, okay? The people who are in the country, and, you know, Suzette is rich and wealthy, but by and large, she is uneducated. She is like not exposed to the world, because she's so controlled by her parents. So why did you kind of go into highlighting those specific kind of characters as opposed to I don't know much about Shreveport, but I would assume like the upper echelon of Shreveport.
That's a good question, and I don't know how deliberately I thought about that, because there is one outlier to that story, which is Agnes. Agnes has a PhD. She broke as hell, but she's highly educated. I think she's naive and has a lot of other like major personality issues.
Agnes is also the only one written in third person.
Yeah, I know.
Why?
Wait, don't sidetrack. Let her finish the first section of the question.
Well, that's okay. Yeah. I can answer it. I think sometimes I think I've learned this about myself. I think that for me, third person offers me a kind of critical distance from characters. And I didn't like Agnes when I started writing her. I'm still not sure that I like Agnes.
I don't like her, but go ahead. Yeah.
She's not a likable character.
Aloof, she's condescending. She's a lot of things.
She's problematic. Yes, absolutely so. And I think that for me, just as a writer, like being able to separate myself from her by third person made it feel a little safer for me to write about her, but then it also made it a little easier because she's not a likable character. Now, let me also say that I love me an unlikable character. I love a disaster on a page. I do. I can hate him and root for him at the same time. I'm still rooting for Agnes. I don't like her. And so I think that's what made third person easier. And I've discovered in other pieces of my work, I've done the same thing. And I'm like, why did that come out that way? And I'm like, oh, right. This character's a serial killer. You know what I mean? Like, it just makes it easier. Yeah, it just makes it easier. And I don't necessarily make a choice at the outset necessarily. I really just kind of think of the first sentence, and however it comes out is how it comes out. But I think on the back end, I do sort of look at it and see like, oh, that's why it's easier for me to do that. Now, okay, back to the question about characters. Yes. So Agnes is the outlier in that Agnes is highly educated. She does come from Shreveport. Her parents are, at least in my in the way I see them, is that her parents were maybe comfortably middle class before the divorce. So certainly, like, and there may have been some education. I don't think I mentioned either of their educations in the book, but like some education there, some comfort pre-divorce. And so, I think that with the other two characters, also Maple has been to college. Right. So Maple meets one of her friends in college, Suzette, who is young and who is enrolling in college at the end of her story. So she's going somewhere. I don't know. I don't necessarily. I guess what I'm trying to say without actually saying it is that I might get in trouble for this, but I do not subscribe to respectability politics, and I think that they are deeply problematic.
And we ain't getting in trouble where? No.
And I do not. Yeah. And what I think is interesting, and the reason that I love Suzette so much, is that she is naive and she does not have the sense of the world, but Suzette catches on very quickly. And Suzette's insight, once she becomes willing to look at things and question them, Suzette picks up things very, very fast. Mm-hmm. Which is not true for Agnes, ironically, who has all this education and no good sense, right? Like, so... And so I like disrupting those binaries. Like, the smartest person in the book is not the kindest. She's not the most knowledgeable. Her life is still very much in a hot mess by the end of the story. There is hope for something else, right? But I like disrupting those things because I don't think that that it is my responsibility to recreate what has been accepted as the best of us and the best of who we are. The best of us can happen in all kinds of places. You know what I mean? And I think if I had to sort of rate who I would be most interested in being friends with in this book, it would probably be Suzette, who is naive and who doesn't yet have the education, but she's getting there and she gets it. And when she sees something, she has the good sense enough to analyze it, to look at it carefully and to start to see things and to start to make changes. And I think that's respectable. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's the portrayal of a good Black woman. She clocks it. She starts to clock it. She hasn't always done it, but once she clocks
it early, so that she's going to have that throughout when she's growth, like throughout her life. She clocked it early. She's not going to get it late.
Yes. Yeah. I was not as perceptive at 20 as Suzette is. She's got a lot to learn, but she's starting early.
So thriving on enough says 100. She is agreeing, but to that point, to respectability politics and respectability stories, right? I want to go back to what Keoka's began talking about was sex. Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about, okay, so y'all know the song, We Can't Pay For It. But I began this by saying, like, Destiny is daring, her prose is brave, and especially for contemporary writers, I think it's important for us to push the envelope, right, to what is acceptable. You are established already, so your journey, may look different. But somebody who is just starting, emerging, or thinking about budding, they're juggling, what can I write about and what can I write about, right? But what I love about you is that you just say, this is real life, right? These are real people. You write about queer relationships. You write about sex workers. If you all have not been in these literary streets, her short story, The Jump, had some what is the word? Some controversy. Yeah, some controversy that we can't get into you right now, but I am going to post a link here so that you can read it at your leisure. But you take some very brave turns in your writing career to say, these are the stories I want to write about. These are the people I want to represent in my work. And in Nobody's Magic, you get into that. You explore that. You explore bisexuality in Suzette's stories. You're exploring sex workers and the relationships between sex workers and Maple and Mommy's story, right? And her mother's story. And you're comfortable enough, like when Maple, right? So I read things, right? I'm not a prude or anything like that. But when Maple pulled out her laptop to show her porno, her mother's porno, to check, I'm like, this is what we're doing. Okay, this is what we're doing. Like, choices like that, when you make choices like that, I'm celebrating that. It's authentic, and those are the stories we need to, put out there. So just your take on why.
Okay, this is what I think. I'm not telling you that this is how I like go into the writing process, but this is what I have come to learn, especially over the past year, because I have been basically like writing full time, is that the amount of energy and it takes to devote my life to this craft, and the number of sacrifices that I make, and the number of things that I don't get to do, and the number of things the number of times that I have to make decisions that I don't want to have to make, but I'm choosing to make them because I believe in what I'm doing, and I believe that this is the work that I'm supposed to be doing. Yes. I don't have the right to censor myself on the page. I have sacrificed too much to get to the page, right? And so whatever comes is what comes. Some of that stuff may never see the light of day. I always tell people, for every book you see, there's a book you don't. there is a novel that was written before Nobody's Magic. There is a poetry collection written before Negotiations. Not everything is going to see the light of day. My job is to show up and to be present and to write what comes. And so I think, in terms of writing about something like sex, which is a part of the human experience.
Yes.
So like I think there's so much concern in terms of genre, like what, how much of that do we get on the page in something that's supposed to be like literary fiction? And I think genres are just, I don't know, they're weird. I don't understand the rules. And I'm kind of glad I don't, because I think it leaves me free enough to just write what I want. I'm not self-censoring in that way. I used to be a really horrible, sort of like self-editor. Like before a thing came out, like if I had an idea, my immediate next thought was like, well, that's stupid. Like that doesn't make any sense. How are you going to do that? And then I got really sick in 2015. And one of the realizations I had was that like, I only have so much control over everything. But but one thing I do have control over is what I write on the page. And so that's the space where I get to be free. I don't necessarily consider myself free in most parts of my life, but I get to be free on the page, and I'm gonna write what I want. You don't have to write about sex if that's not your thing. You don't have to write about queer people if that's not your thing. I do believe in representation, and I think if you write in the world, you probably should put some queer people in it because they in the real world. But you know what I mean? To each their own. I don't get to tell people what to do, but I get to explore, and I get to be curious, and I get to like make mistakes, and I get to hard pivot. And if I am thinking at all about, the respectability politics of literary fiction, or if I am thinking at all about what somebody might think about me writing about sex, then I am not being as free as I could be. And I think the work suffers, really. I don't know that I was the best writer I could have been back when I was the horrible self-editor. When I took those, I don't even know what you call it. Like when I took that stuff out of the equation, it got better. And so, and I'm never here. I'm never going to do anything that is going to diminish the quality of my writing, at least not intentionally.
Yes.
So, yeah, be free on the page. Some of it may never see the light of day, and it probably shouldn't. I plan on burning some stuff. Some stuff don't need to make it into the archives.
I feel like when you reading good sex scenes, right? I can't write good sex scenes. I'm working on it. But if it's a good scene, if you worked on it, if it's authentic, then yes, put it in there. And well, we'll get into advice later, so I'll save that for later. But
I want to say something though. What I appreciated was it wasn't sex just for sex sake, right? It was very intentional the way you use sex in each story. So I found that Suzette had sex when she kind of gained more of her independence. Sex was like a liberation, and then Maple kind of abstained from sex. There was a period where she wanted to have it.
Maple does not have sex in her story, which I did intentionally. Yeah, that's the irony of that story, is that there's sex all around, but Maple's not having any.
Yeah, but I appreciate that, right? Because I appreciate that because I think sometimes not having sex can bring a certain level of clarity, and it also forced her to confront her emotions and the grief that she was going through. And then Agnes almost uses sex to appease. Like she kind of goes out of her body a lot, I noticed. Like she's never really present in the experience. She's always like on this mental tangent that's happening. And we only hear about her orgasming when Prime says that he'll take her home.
Yep.
I was like, oh, this is good. When I was reading it, I was like, underline.
Yeah. Sex is a form of currency for her because she feels like, I think at least in Agnes's case, she doesn't feel like she has anything else. And in some cases she doesn't. Like she does, but she doesn't. She's got it, but she hasn't used it. You know what I mean? Like She could have got home a different way. She could have asked her mama to get her home. You know what I mean?
And people aren't gonna like this, right? But like, I'm gonna make the connection between the way Agnes uses sex and the way Mommy in Maple Story uses sex. So even though Mommy is a sex worker and is transactional, she actually enjoys what she's doing.
That's the difference. Yeah,
she gets pleasure from it.
Yeah,
she does,
and she doesn't necessarily need it. Agnes doesn't enjoy it, but she thinks that this is the only thing that she can give to someone, or the only, like you said, the only value that she has.
For her only currency at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think Agnes does think a lot about life in terms of currency, like social currency, educational currency, literal currency, like having money. And I think she gets to a point where she feels so low that sex becomes her only currency. And it starts with the white dude, Colin. I think that's his name. Yeah.
Yes. But just when you address those things, even like in Agnes's case, because I was, reading that like, oh, this is sexual trauma, right? From her and Colin's relationship. So even like when you get into like taboo subjects like that, queer relationships, queer sex, it can be inhibiting for people, period, especially in the Black community, right? And in Black literature, definitely, right? So it's inhibiting. But then when you're a writer trying to get that out, you get all these, well, you can't do that, it has to be this, that's erotic, and all of these things. So just the fact that it's in there, that it is a part of a literary canon, right? Literary fiction as opposed to genre fiction, like erotic fiction or urban fiction. I think it's something to be celebrated.
Thank you.
Yes. Coco Uninterrupted says Agnes also seems to fit herself into other people's visions. She does not seem to have a sense of herself or her value and what she truly wants.
I agree. Yes. And I think that goes back to like daddy trauma, right? Like the dad who kind of left very abruptly and the family's fortunes kind of fall. And I think that it really puts Agnes on like a pick me journey. You know what I mean? Like, well, if I do this and this and this and this, then I'll be good enough to return to the life that I wanted. And quiet as it's kept, some of her anger toward Bernice is, I think that Bernice has kind of wrangled some sense of that back. Like, she literally buys the house that they lived in. She sort of turns it into like this kind of, know, Frankensteinian mansion. But I think that that's part of the conflict between them that may, persist after, way after the end of their story. But it's that Bernice has kind of wrangled that at a cost, but she has kind of gotten it. And I think Agnes sort of looking around the house and thinking like, well, I would have chosen something else, I think is indicative of that. Is that she, she too has tried to sort of return to the vision of her childhood. And she has failed at that miserably. But Bernice has some semblance of it, even if it's built on shaky grounds.
I want to get into, so we were talking about, you just brought up the relationship between Bernice and Agnes. So relationships, right? This, you can say throughout this book, mother-daughter relationships, men-women relationships, wife, Mr. Curtis, wife and husband relationships. But what I want to say about this, I really appreciate the Black love stories that you created in here, especially with the women, right? With the friendships, but especially with Black men. They're really well-rounded, full, in-depth characters who really cared about the women, our mains, right? Suzette, Maple, and Prime and Agnes to a certain extent. But the care that Donnie has for, and the care and what is it? Intention, I guess, is the word that he comes with when he's dealing with Suzette, right? And even like, listen, right now, Doughboy, this is his name, Chad, Doughboy Chad, which you did not expect, right? That was I didn't expect it. How his intention and his care and his just a really well-rounded character in his relationship with, because she was ready. She was like, hey, she
and
was
still deeply flawed. Deeply flawed. Like still not having emotional maturity, like still working on trying to figure things out, how to communicate, how to deal with their big feelings, but still
how to be a dad.
Came at it with love.
Yes. And you don't, for whatever reason, you don't get a lot of that in when trying to define and trying to talk about and trying to craft Black women and Black men love stories, right, in contemporary fiction. So I appreciate that, but I wanted to know, was that intentional, or did it just happen like that?
Yes, and also no. I mean, yeah, like the general answer is yes. I did not set out like, I'm gonna create, a good Black man. I'm sorry. I'm thinking about right.
He's a good man, Savannah. He's a good man, Savannah.
Yeah. You know what I think about? I don't know if y'all like. You remember the Martin episode where they tell the story of how Martin and Gina first met?
Yeah.
And everybody has a different version, and there's her version. He's just like this nerd, and she was like, "We'll take this raw clay and one day mold a great man."
And his version, he was a pimp. Yeah.
Yes, he was. What is that? What? He's from that movie.
Dolomite. Was he Dolomite?
Not Dolomite. Oh my gosh, I cannot. But I dated a guy who made me watch that movie, and I was like, what happened to my brain for those 2 hours? But I can't remember his name. But yeah, like he did that remake from that movie. But like, so no, it was not like that. It was not like Gina like molding a great man. But I do like complicated characters. I like characters that surprise, and that's across the gender spectrum for me. Like I like to think about my characters as real people. I think about them as real people. I talk about them as real people. I have said this many times before, that may be indicative of some kind of like mental health thing, but I need to see them as people. They are not conduits for my own propaganda. They are not, which is kind of what we talked about earlier. They are not saviors for the representation of the race. Like they are actual people, and they are flawed, and they are difficult sometimes. And in other moments, they fail each other. And so I approach every character like that. And I think but they're also based on people that I've interacted with. Like Chad is based on someone that think they dated, but like this guy, he was like interested in my sister. Like I won't name names or anything, but was very deep into his profession, but also very like tender and gentle, and like, you know what I mean? And so like and in Donnie's case, like Donnie, I think probably, and without my actually thinking about it until well after the fact, like based on my uncle. My uncle was great with cars, but he was also a really good cook. Like he could cook. Like he made jams and jellies, and he would always whenever I would come home, he passed away last summer, but whenever I would come home, he knew that there was a certain kind of jelly that I like. I like crab apple. And so he would save the crab apples for me. So like when I came home, because he's like, don't nobody else like that one. But so he would set them aside for me. Like, and so like those acts of tenderness, even though he was very much like a man's man, very, very gruff, sometimes grumpy, but also like paid attention to the things that were important to you. Like, I had this really lovely memory of like several years ago, when I went home, and he showed me these notebooks he had, and he wrote poetry, and like song lyrics, and like, yeah, and I love that about people, that they are so complex, and especially Black people,
Yeah.
like so complex, so multifaceted, so, like, yeah, my family is chaotic, but there were people who, like, I had uncles who could play instruments, like, without formal training, like, they just sort of sit down and learn. And what my cousins are like that, like, they can just sort of learn, like, this is like these gifts that you don't know a person has, and suddenly they just like pop up, like, oh yeah, I do know how to do that. And so I think that, like, that is what bleeds into how I write people. It's like, and I don't think that static characters are particularly interesting. Nobody is all good or all bad, or all, I don't know, like, all unintelligent, all intelligent, right? Like, we have blind spots, and we have shortcomings, and we have, again, like, these really strange gifts. And so when I was writing the men, that's what I wanted them to be. Like, even Prime has his, I think that relationship
I
is
like
was.
Prime. I liked Prime. I was telling him to get away from Agnes. I liked him. He was an artist, right? He was an artist.
He
But
was.
he was in the war. He had PSTD. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was traumatized. So
Mhm.
his love bombing was for a reason. You know what I mean?
Yes. Right. Yeah. Like, I do think that their relationship for me makes me uncomfortable, because I do think that I do think there was sexual violence present in their relationship, even though their sexual relationship was consensual. There was a power dynamic there. And he starts to realize that too, like, especially like once she destroyed the tests, like, I think that was a moment for him where he was like, I think I've got a way in. Right.
It was, I
Like,
think, like, interesting you say that. I'm like, oh, he's the younger version of Mr. Curtis. He's a young, in a way, he's like, somebody he can save, somebody who needs him, somebody
mhm.
he can rescue, and then will be beholden to him. So
Yep. Yes, I completely agree. I had not thought about that, but yes,
mhm.
very
I
much
mean,
so.
I didn't dated a Mr. Prime before,
Hmm.
so
You said you like a juice box, yeah.
I do
Mhm.
like a juice box. I was kind of looking at Chad.
She called him
I like
juice
a juice
box.
box.
The
Listen, give
juice
me
box
a
built.
big, square-shouldered man with a ball head.
A juice box.
A juice
That's
box.
fascinating. I've heard of juice head, not juice box, but you right.
Juice box.
Amina says
Love
that
it.
reminds me of my grandfather, complex and loving. Which
Mhm.
one? Which character, Amina? Bonita says I used to pick and eat crab apples when I was much younger. First time I heard someone mention, but I was like, when you said crab apple jelly, I'm like, from the trees, the ones that we used to eat outside.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, he would pick. Yeah, he would find. So he used to work for the cable company. So he had like people around the city who he knew what trees were in their yards, and so he had like he had kind of set it up where he could go and pick he could go and pick the different fruits. I don't know where he got the, so he made like crab apple, strawberry, blueberry, plum, which was also really good. um oh yeah, thank you, Amina. I think we were curious about which character reminded uh so like my uncle reminds
yeah,
Amina
of
of her
her.
grandfather. Yo, yeah.
That reminds me of
Yeah,
her grandfather.
he was very much he was an old school, man. But he would definitely get the crab apples from people he knew, like people who had the trees in their yard, I guess. Crab apples grow on trees. I've actually never, I don't know if I've ever seen a crab apple on a tree. I've
They
seen
were
them.
always on the ground.
Yeah, they were already in the kitchen by the time um but yeah, that was my favorite, and I miss that I won't get to have his jelly anymore, cuz
What's his
yeah.
name? What's his name?
Carlos, my uncle
Carlos.
Carlos.
Shout out Uncle
Mhm.
Carlos. We have a question that I saw earlier from Chanel. That is good to hear her say. I sometimes wonder if authors see their characters like mothers see their children.
Mm. I think for me, Not always. I do. Okay, so books are not human beings, but I do often think of my books in the way I tell people, like, I take care of my books the way my mom took care of her kids. She was hard on us, but if we needed something, she got us. You know what I mean? Which is, and that's how, like, even when you reached out to me, I'm like, yeah, of course I'm showing up for my, I'm showing up for my kids. You want me to come talk about my kids? Yes, I will come talk about my kids. Like,
Yes.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. I'm always going to advocate for them. I'm always going to appreciate when people see good things in them. Yes. The characters themselves, I don't know, I think of them as individuals who, or at least I try to, which is where third person might come in when necessary, but I try to think of them as not me, like not connected to me. And the reason that I think that's useful for me is because it means that they have their own agency, and so I'm not always the one driving the car when it comes to what happens to them. And sometimes they do things and I'm like, whoa. I always tell the story. You have probably heard it. You probably heard, if you listen to my interviews, you probably heard me tell the story. But when I first started writing Maple Story, and the first scene, yes, I wanted them. So I have a doctorate in literature. My dissertation was about traumatic transmissions of knowledge between mothers and daughters. So all I wrote about was like these really difficult moments in mother-daughter relationships. When I started writing Maple Story, I was like, I want to write about a mother and daughter who are best friends. They don't have any problems with each other. They love each other. They get along. They hang out. Because I was like, I need to change of pace. I want a healthy mother-daughter relationship. I wrote the first scene of that part of the novel. I got up. I went to cook some dinner. I was like staring down into the pot on the stove, getting ready to like put something in it. And there's a little voice that said, the mother's supposed to be dead. And I was like, what? I was like, no, because I want to write about a healthy mother-daughter relationship. That's what I wanted. But I made a deal with myself. And I said, I'm going to sit down tomorrow, because I wrote in like 90 to 120 minute sessions. Like, that's how I finished Nobody's Magic. So I was like, all right, I'm going to sit down in my session tomorrow. I'm going to write as if she's dead. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, I'm going back to my original plan, because I thought my plan was the best idea anyway. I did. And it worked, of course, right? Like, but I appreciate that I'm able to do that, because I do think it keeps your characters from becoming these extensions of you and what you feel like needs to be said. Because sometimes what you feel like needs to be said is not something that character is supposed to say. That may be something for your next book, your next project, your next, you know what I mean? Right. Your next short story, right. Whatever. And so like, yeah, I do try to think of them as like separate entities, and for me, like mother child may be a little too close for that. I think more of them as like friends. Yeah, and in some cases, friends that in Agnes's case, friends that I don't particularly like, people that don't always do what I want them to do.
I think you still hit it. Like, they were still good friends. They were still besties, right? Mummy and Maple, mm-hmm. Yeah. Even though she passed, like the backstory mm-hmm. for them, like they were still besties. Her mother put her on her game, but she put her on mm-hmm. game. She had no mm-hmm. home guard. She raised her as her friend. She had her when she was 15, 14. So they mm-hmm. grew up together, right? Mm-hmm. And so to a certain extent, for that story, you did set out from what your dissertation, from what your thought on your dissertation was. I want to write a good, it was that she just left the present day early.
She left early. Yeah, right. She became present in another form. Yeah.
Exactly. So along those lines, Benita says, do you listen to your characters when they say something against your plan? She just elaborated on that. Yes, just now. Yes.
Yeah, I do. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm still making the decisions, right? But in those first drafts, I try to let myself do anything. Like, whatever happens, right? Like I want to say I saw a clip from Tyler, the Creator, a couple of weeks ago, and it said, like, create like a child and edit like a scientist. And so, when it's first coming out, they do all kinds of stuff. Like, yes. Yeah, without telling too much, like right now I'm writing about survivors of sexual trauma who don't behave in the ways that survivors are supposed to behave. And
Mm.
things get a little rowdy. Like, you know
Mhm.
what I mean? But I love that. Like I do. And I might have to dial some of it back, but right now I love the chaos. I like it. I think the thing that really fascinates me about Maple and what initially fascinated me, I think, and what made it possible for me to write about her mother's if she was dead is because people do not all grieve the same way.
Yes.
Like, they don't. And I'm a crime TV junkie. I always get angry when they're interviewing some detective and they say, like, well, we turned our attention to her because she wasn't grieving right. Like, what's
Oh, she
the right
wasn't
way to
crying. She
grieve?
didn't cry. She was stoic and
Yeah.
all.
Oh, she
Yeah.
wasn't crying, or, she did. And sometimes people do really unexpected and sometimes frustrating things when it comes to grief, right? Especially if you're also mourning a person and this person over here is pretending like they never lived. Yeah, that's upsetting. But we all process grief differently. We all process trauma differently. We all process our childhoods differently. And sometimes it means that characters go off the rails. That that certainly happened in real life. So, I really do try to let them do whatever they seem to want. And then I can go back on the back end and say, hey, okay, what about this needs to change? Like, what, yeah.
We have a question from Amina, but before we get to Amina's question, I know Kyoka, you had a question about grief.
Yes. I'm in my thoughts.
Before we leave, since she just mentioned that, I wanted to address that before we go into.
Do you have my questions up? Because I don't
I
see my
can
question
get them. I can get them. Well, then let's go ahead and talk about Amina's until I bring that up. Amina's question was about the title. So
Yes.
that we're going to use that as our bridge to talk
Mhm.
about the subject matter of people living with albinism, right?
Yes.
Nobody's magic. So let's get into the title. I was intrigued
Mm-hmm.
from the title because growing up, I guess I grew up from little to like college with a lot of firsthand experience with people in my neighborhood growing up, young people who had albinism, right? And I had never heard of any of these myths, right? Um, so why did you choose the title? Let's say that. Why did you choose the title?
Okay. All right. So the original title, this book was sold as Dream Girls. Then the press was like, well, that's like the musical. And I'm like, right, because it's 3 of them. Like, I mean, like, that was kind of by intention. And they're like, well, we got to change the title, which is often a thing that happens.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so my editor and I were sort of like throwing around titles. I am not a person who loves long titles, but you know what? I have a book right now that's got a long title. So, every time I say never, God says,
There you go.
hold on.
Oh, my dear.
Watch
Oh,
this.
my dear. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Like, watch this. So we were kind of throwing around titles, and I think one of them was like "Nobody Owns You," which I was like, oh yeah. Like, I like that. And I was like, well, let me take the weekend to think about it. And for some reason, I pulled up. I started thinking about Yellow Man, who is this Caribbean dance hall performer, Jamaican man with albinism. And I started watching YouTube videos of him, and just like how trifling people were, like when he was like coming up, like, because sometimes they would perform, I guess, like that the performers would all perform like on a stage together, like there may have been like several people, and you would hand the other person the mic and they wouldn't hand him the mic, like people just like being jerks.
Right.
And I like, man, like it's interesting to me that I'm a Black woman. Like, there's no other place I belong, no other place I'm supposed to be. I know that there are some really interesting conversations going on right now about what makes a Black person, but yeah, you know what I mean? That you can't black is not a card that you can just pull from people. I know there are a bunch of skits online, but that's not how that works. But I do often think about my identity and like who I belong to. Right. And when I was thinking about Yellow Man, by thinking about how talented he was. I remember being a kid and my sister's first husband was like, "Hey, have you ever heard of this person?" And he handed me like an album cover. And I was like, "No, I don't know who that is." But I think about like his legacy, like, and sort of persisting through the kinds of discrimination that he was describing in the interviews I watched. And it's like, he had such a gift. And he had to cultivate it in the absence of love and support from his community. And in that sense, magic doesn't belong to anybody but you. I think that's true for all Black people. Like, you know, like your magic is your magic. It is part and parcel of the community, but it also belongs to you. It belongs to you, and nobody gets to define it. Nobody gets to put barriers around it. Nobody gets to tell you how magical it is or how Black it is or how anything. It's yours. It is yours, and you get to own it, you get to define it, and you get to wield it how you choose, because people may not always support who you are and what you're doing, and they might not always include you in the pantheon. You still got to make magic.
Right. Mm-hmm. So Chanel says, "Oh, that is so possessive." That was going to be my question. I wasn't sure if it was nobody is magic or nobody owns the magic.
Yeah. Well, we did kind of like the ambiguity of the title. And so I think people have read it several ways. I don't have an opinion about that, but that's how I came to the title, actually. Yeah.
Bonita says people use the word magic in Black culture
in certain
ways many times.
Yeah, because sometimes it means you can't hurt. You can't be openly suffering. You can't be openly grieving. You can't openly need anything. And that's a lesson I've had to learn recently, to know how to tell people, like, I'm not okay, or I need help. That's such a hard thing for me to do. I was not raised that way. I was raised around, you know, I was raised by really strong, powerful, self-sufficient Black women. And so I was raised to believe that's what I'm supposed to be too. That's my magic. But I think the magic is in survival. The magic is in the fact that I can sit here and have a conversation with you about something that I made. And I think of all of the people who came before me who didn't have the time or the energy or the resources to make the things that they really wanted to make. But they made stuff anyway. Again, I come from a family of artists. My people will make something out of something. I had a cousin who also passed away, but I remember being a little kid and being so geeked out about this. So, you know, like the little tiny Christmas trees that had like these little ornaments on them. One Christmas, she took 2 of the ornaments and like scraped all the paint off and then like repainted them with nail polish and made earrings. And I was just like, I was like maybe like 6 or 7. And I was like, oh my God, she's so cool. It's like that's where the magic lies, is in the persistence in spite of, because this country hates Black people. Its policies are anti-Black. Its policies are anti-poverty. Like, its policies are like, there is very little in this country that supports me just as a human being surviving, much less as an artist, like making art. Mm-hmm. Like taking time to make art instead of desperately trying to make money.
Killing yourself killing yourself to work, and yes.
Yeah. The fact that I have figured out a way to make it at all is magical. Yes. But I also need help, and I need community. I can't do it by myself. So yeah.
Yes, Amina, that we are strong and superhuman, that is burdensome life. Yes. Mm-hmm. Tori, the title gives the finger to the magical Negro trope that they love to use for us in books. I thought about that while reading it, like the pushback through that, the pushback through, you know, especially with Prime. He was so excited. He went to Wikipedia. He was so excited. I got me a magic woman. I got me a magic woman. All this disappear. Oh
yeah. And that he didn't ask her. He didn't talk to her at all.
He didn't ask her one question. Anything. Is it true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. That people come to you with their preconceived notions. And yeah, like that's, and that becomes a part of Suzette's story too. Like when the guys are like, they come up to her and Drina and they're like, yeah, I heard this about like people with albinism and HIV, and like, yeah,
Yes.
just like the things that get put on you without your consent. I really think that one of the really devastating things, and this is not like a community specific thing, I think it is a people thing, is that when you live in a body that people clock is like not normal, you, in their eyes, you lose agency. So like they get to say to you what they want, they get to do to you what they want, and you just have to deal with it. And I think that too, I think is an important part of what I try to do in my work, is really try to give my characters the agency that the world does not always give them, simply because they do not look the way people expect them to look.
Well, just a personal question. Growing up, did you experience any of this personally? Like the people?
Oh yeah, people terrible.
But when you put it in there, I'm like I grew kids are cruel, and I was specifically going back. My memory bad though, girl. I smoke weed. My memory not good, but I was trying to think because we had friends, and we didn't.
But you probably didn't notice too.
I didn't notice, maybe because my point of view, but I don't remember hearing these things, even because kids can be cruel. I was trying to think, we would rip on each other, but I was trying to remember like somebody being specifically cruel about like thinking they had magical powers or things like that. So that was mine.
That might be a Louisiana thing.
Yeah, I mean, so the magical power stuff didn't come to me until I was like college age. So as a kid, of course, like other kids, I just I remember hating the song, the Beastie Boys song "Brass Monkey" because kids would sing "Brass Honky" to me.
Oh no.
Yeah, listen, kids are assholes. Let me just say that they are gifts from God. They are precious. They are precious in the Lord's sight, but they're also jerks.
Assholes, yes.
Yeah, they're jerks. Some of them, not all of them. And so yeah, I got a lot of that stuff. Like even some of the the bully at the beginning of Agnes's story in high school. Like there were definitely people in my life who were who did those kinds of things. Yeah, absolutely. I'm petty though, and I like to catch up with people. And a lot of the people who dogged me as a kid, like them mofos is aging like milk. And I feel like, hey, sometimes karma take a long time to get to you. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, it was like it was incredibly difficult. I used to hate going to I used to love going to the grocery store as a kid because we would get stuff, we would get candy and all that stuff. Have a very specific memory, and this is very much a deep South memory. I have a memory of sitting in the back of my mom's station wagon on the way home from the grocery store eating pig feet and M&Ms. It was a good day. She had a friend. She didn't buy pig feet, but she took our friend to the store and our friend ate pig feet. And I guess I must have been like, well, what does it taste like? And so she let me have one. And so, yes, I was eating pig feet and M&Ms in the back of my mom's station wagon. She had one of those station wagons that had a seat that faced the back. That you could flip up.
The old days. Yeah.
So, because people would stare, people would point, kids would freak out. But life, it's so interesting, like how life changes like full circle. So like, I was, I hold those memories like in my body. Like I still, have moments of anxiety when I enter public spaces, but, so recently there were a couple of times I went to the grocery store and people would stop and they'd be like, oh, I just wanted to tell you, I think you're so beautiful. And I'm like, what a full circle moment. Like that, like 5-year-old me was afraid of going into the grocery store, because of the ways that people would just sort of make me feel like I was some kind of monster. And like fast forward to today, I'm happy that I live in a world that has expanded its idea of beauty, because that it was not that wide when I was young. I won't lie to you.
So we had 3 different takes on that, Amina, and just thanks you for reminding me, because yes, when I read African stories, African novels, and African short stories, children, that's the wrong one. The magical powers equals albinism trope is used in African countries. I do, especially Things Fall Apart, books like that. They're often mentioned with magical powers or taboos or bad luck. All of those things are listed for that.
Body parts used in witchcraft ceremonies, like just why. Yeah, there was a recent story about a little girl in South Africa who went missing, and they think that her mother sold her to a witch doctor for her eyes and skin. I don't think that she may have had a form of albinism, like she was fair skinned but still had like some pigment, but she had light colored eyes, and the eyes are often a prized commodity, and so. Yeah, like it's really heartbreaking. And then just like the ways that people will sort of think that it's some kind of contagion, and also that it's like the worst thing that could happen, so like they don't want a person with albinism drinking from their cups, because they don't want it to sort of be passed on to their children. And like, just, I don't, man, I struggle with wanting to be honest about how I feel about that, and also being culturally respectful. But
I think you did a good job of in each story, you didn't hark on it. It wasn't like a sermon, but this is what happens, and you drop it in there, and then you dispel the myth, right? You say this is what's going on, but it's not the focal point of the stories. It's part of their makeup. It's part of their background.
I also appreciated. I also appreciate that your characters were still very Black. Like, so we have Agnes kind of hiding herself a little bit, but never was she passing, like trying to pretend to be white. And I think, especially considering that last book we read, Sky Full of Elephants, I think it's so important for us to read characters that are decidedly Black, because there is no other option. Like, you are culturally Black. You grow up in a family that's Black, in a surrounding that's Black. It's not like you decide to straighten your hair and then just go over to the other side and live your life as a white person.
Right.
I appreciated that as well. But is there a process to get to that? Is there a consideration of like who am I ethnically, even though I know that my family is Black?
I think that happened for me. There were definitely moments when I was like, my life would probably be easier if I lived with white people. But I think it had more to do with like how hard life felt at the moment, as opposed to like what I fit in better culturally. Do you see what I mean? Like, being bullied and like being picked on. It's like, well, maybe I'll just make this easier for everybody else if I just went somewhere else and like lived somewhere else. Like, I'm so sad. I feel so empty. Maybe this isn't where I'm supposed to be. But those are thoughts I had at like 11, 12. You know what I mean? Like, as an adult, I never had those desires. And I do remember going to like I was in 4-H for a while, go figure. Southern State, of course. So we had this like camp, and I went with my best friend at the time, her younger sister, who was only like a couple of years younger than us. So we went together for the weekend. So we were kind of like buddies during that weekend, and we were unpacking our bags in like the little cabin, and this other little Black girl comes up to us and she says, I know what you are. How do you identify? Because I have a cousin and she identifies as white. And I remember me and my friend's little sister's name was Kia. Like, we looked at each other, we were like, what? Like, and then Kia says, she's Black. And I think that it was a meta statement about me and the cousin.
How old was this person?
She was around our age, so I would have been I would have been maybe, I was in high school at the time, so I would have been maybe 14, 15. Kia might have been 12 or 13. And I would say that the other little girl would have been around the same age, maybe 13,
Okay.
14. Yeah, yeah. So,
What do you think she meant mixed? No.
No.
She was very
She said the cousin identified as white. And so and she's like, I know you have albinism.
Right. Okay. That's what the question was. Okay. That's the clarifying question.
Yeah, like the cousin had albinism, and she was like, I know what you are. Like, what do you call yourself racially?
Right.
And I don't necessarily see that as like a I have never seen that as a choice that I could just make. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm black.
I mean, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't. Yeah, I don't. But I also think that comes from like and this is not to disparage anybody, but I think it also comes from a really strong family structure. Nobody in my family ever told me that you know what I mean, that my race was in question.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I have a very specific. Say it again.
I said right because of your albinism. Like it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a world.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Say it again.
I'm interrupting you. Go ahead.
No, well, I was gonna say like I grew up in a world where like if your mom's black, like you black. Yeah, my mom's black.
That's the rule of thumb.
That's the rule though. Wait, when I say that, people be like, well, what if the dad is? I'm like, no, if your mom
doesn't
black,
matter.
You're black. Your mother, then you're black.
Yeah. And if you have a black parent, right? Yeah. Like you, I mean, like, I don't, all of the rhetoric now around that stuff is, you know, like if you got to have 4 black grandparents, I'm like, if that's a rule, Frederick Douglass was not black.
Listen, I be like, what are y'all talking about? I'm like, y'all watch too many YouTube videos. It's like, what are y'all talking about? What are you have to, because then, okay, that's a sad. We're not gonna get into that.
But right? It's another conversation. But I just never grew up in a world where I felt like I had the choice. I think there were moments when I thought life might be easier if I could escape into something else. But I never thought that I was somehow less black because I'm blonde. Yeah. I'm just like, it's weird. Like, and I know that I am not, you know, a Gen Xer or anything like that. So I just think I grew up in a different time and place, and I'm kind of glad about that. Because I just never have those questions, even when it is clear to me that people around me have those questions. I'm like, you can take that argument up with my mama. You're not gonna win. But you can. You can try.
Bonita sums it up. Girl, that's funny. You black.
It's just it's a very strange time for us when we talk about race and racial mixture and like all of that stuff. Also, not that this, I mean, because it's not like the race Olympics or anything, but a few years ago I did like the DNA swab and the results were shocking.
You were what, 99% African? What was it?
It was 91%.
See?
And from all over the continent, like Mali, Nigeria, the Western Bantu peoples, the Southern Bantu peoples. What was most interesting though is that I was always raised being told that one of my great-great-grandparents was almost fully like Native American. There was I have no Native American ancestry at all.
But everything else, why is that always the story?
It's always the story. And when people hear my last name, they're always like, is that Native American? And I'm like, no, actually it's not. You know, like, and it's my neighbors are mowing, so there may be like some background noise, but yeah, like it was really interesting to get I mean, and I know the results are not like perfect or anything, but it was interesting to like see because, you know, like my mom has, well, she did when she was growing up. She tells the story that like my mom had sandy brown hair when she was a child. And then she said she dyed it as a teenager. And then from that point on, it grew in black. I don't know. My mama don't lie, but I'm like,
that's her business.
You can't just dye your hair one time and then it probably maybe changed over the course, like as she got older or whatever, it maybe got darker. But my parent, I had always presumed that, my mother and possibly my father were like, just had more white ancestry just based on some of their features. That may have also just been the genes that present themselves in carriers of albinism. Like, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but I was really shocked by like the results, and I was like, whoa, like that's really interesting. But I think what it says to me is that we don't get to eyeball blackness.
Yes.
It is not an accurate measurement. You don't get to look at somebody and say, because you don't look like this, you don't get to be black.
Exactly.
You don't. Exactly.
Tori says we all grew up with that lie. And even like, if you watch Finding Your Roots with Gates, he always says, y'all, we always think this, and less than like 2%. I'm just making that percentage, but he was like less than 2% of us have Native American heritage ancestry. So we need to stop.
Yeah.
That needs to be one of the myths that we stop passing on to generations.
I feel like the backstory might be really interesting, because I was like, what it probably means is that great-great-grandparent, who I believe was a woman, was probably passing as Native American for whatever reasons. Maybe maybe because racial discrimination, it may have changed her sense of safety in whatever place she was, or it may have been for some kind of economic advancement or whatever. Like, I think it's interesting that whoever that person was, like, lived out her life with this chosen lie. You know what I mean? Like, for whatever reason. I'm actually really fascinated by it. I would love to figure out like what the real backstory is, because clearly it wasn't what she said it was. Because the rest of me is like from Europe. like Czechoslovakia, Czechoslovakia, Norway, Ireland, places like that. So it's black and it's white, literally. Yeah.
I mean, it's culture with race in America, and it's irritating. Yes.
That's real. So yeah.
So regarding grief, right? There's a lot of grieving going on in this novel, from each stories. How did you set out to handle that? Were you going through something at that time, or is just the stories, like you said, the characters, the story came to you?
Well, I think I was real broke like Agnes. So I feel like Agnes' story came first because I could relate to it. Like, I was broke, I was doing, grading. There were things about my life that I was frustrated about. It's not like autobiographical, but I wasn't professionally, I was in a similar place as Agnes. Like, I had a doctorate. I wasn't working a job I loved. I was in this space where I was working for extra money. There were things that I was frustrated about. And so I do think that sometimes the sort of, fiction is fiction. Like I am none of my characters.
Yes. But it bleeds in sometimes. It bleeds in.
It's right. Like there are things that are happening in your life. I didn't even realize this until after I wrote it, but Suzette's father's profession as a custom car dealer or whatever, that had come up because at the time I had a car and the sunroof was leaking, so I was having to take it, I was taking it around to different people, these different shops, figuring out who could fix it. And that just sort of bled into like what he would be, like how he, like, because he could have been he could have been an oil field guy or some, he could have made his money in different ways. But I think that just sometimes like the little things that happen in your life become parts of that narrative, just because it's a part of your experience. It's maybe the thing that you're thinking about at the moment, or it may be something that sort of bubbles up from like years ago. Like, I find myself now writing things and I'm like, I wrote a version of this a while ago that didn't work, and now it's been refined and it's evolved, but I can trace the DNA like back to that poem I wrote or that like short story that I wrote. Especially like with the love relationships. I came into the writing world thinking I was going to be a love poet. Like that's what I wanted to write about all the time. That's what I was the most interested in. And so I've written a lot of love poems, but I've also written a lot of stories about people falling in love and being in love and like the complications of love. And so a lot of that stuff really did kind of mature into the storylines in Nobody's Magic and in the things I'm working on right now. But yeah, like Suzette and Donnie, I feel like there are precursors to them in other things I've written. And so sometimes it's also like the evolution of something that you were thinking about years ago, and it kind of trickles back into your consciousness and you find yourself writing about it, sometimes without even knowing until, the very end.
I love that.
Yes. Keoka, do you want to say a word before you hop off?
Yes, so I have to go, but I appreciate this conversation with you. I love all of your insight. I'm gonna watch the rest of this, but I'm gonna take the 90 to 120-minute writing sessions that you do and try to finish my work, child. Because I took a little breather. I do want to say before I leave, I lost my mom like a few years ago, and I really loved Maple's story. I also understood why she was watching those videos of her, because it's like you're thirsty in a weird way. It's like you're thirsty just to see her and to see her happy. And then I think also for me, I love that her mother was sort of this imperfect character, because I feel like as I got older, coming to terms with the fact that my mom also was just a woman figuring it out kind of helped me grow into my own womanness and kind of settle into, okay, it's okay to make mistakes. I don't have to live up to whatever this idea in my head of what a woman is supposed to be. So I really appreciate your work, and thank you so much for joining us. It was lovely to meet you. I hope we have more conversations. And I'm going to head out, y'all.
Oh gosh, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, lady. We'll see you later. Okay. So I appreciate the fact that she was able to stay with us for some time. We will get to general questions. We have been keeping her for it's been an hour and a half, y'all. Yeah, it's been we've been talking. I still have a few more questions. So since we're talking about grief and in that, when you talk about relationships, like grieving friendships, I want to talk a little about Suzette and her grieving a friendship, or her loss, or her change, the change of friendship with her when she did not realize who was in love with her, right? Get into friendships and sisterhood and what you think a sister should be, and how Bernadette failed, is that that child's name? Failed Agnes in her sisterhood. I want to get into a little about that and why you why you chose to flesh those things out.
Well, thank you for asking that, because I think that that's one of my other obsessions. I think what's interesting is that, I came into writing presuming that I was going to be a love poet, and that's what I wrote about. But love and Black love takes so many forms, right? There is this very heteronormative thing that happens between Donnie and Suzette, but then there's this other thing that happens between Suzette and Fredrina, which is it is complicated and messy, and Fredrina has been complicit in Suzette's cloistering and all of these things. But I'm fascinated with how the different iterations of love that can happen in different parts of our life. Yeah, several years ago, I reviewed a book by Michelle Morano, and it's a nonfiction collection of essays called Like Love. And the premise of the book is that we have romance throughout all of our lives. It's not always erotic, but it is romantic. And that can happen between you and your neighbor, between you and a stranger that you meet on a trip to Europe, between you and maybe even one of your parents, right? That there are these ways that people build romantic attachments in many parts of their lives, even though it's not sexual, it's not erotic, this isn't your life partner. It is just a very strong connection that you make with the person, and it may last a lifetime or it may just last the length of your stay. And I really believe that. And so when I'm writing about friendships, I feel like I am writing about that, and also how messy it can be when one person wants something and the other person wants something else, or sometimes the things that can happen when we get so attached to people that we are convinced that what we want for them is what they should have and is what is right for them. And how do you navigate that difficulty when you love a person very much, but you feel stifled by them, you feel suffocated? And so I think in terms of Suzette and Drina, like that's what I wanted to write about, is this really beautiful friendship that has lasted for most of Suzette's life. But as Suzette is changing, the friendship also has to change. And Fredrina has to allow it to change in order for them to stay close. And so like, and so I have a lot of fun doing that, because I feel like some of the strongest relationships in my life are in my friendships. Like I think sometimes they have more of an impact on me than like romantic attachments, right? And they often last way longer, you know, like yeah, like some of I've had friendships that have lasted for most of my adulthood. I've had friendships that only lasted a few years, like, but they often have really profound impacts no matter their duration. And so I feel like I'm always writing about that, because I'm just trying to figure that stuff out. Like, how do we treat each other? How do the ways we treat each other change who we are? How do things begin? How do things begin? How do they end? To speak about Agnes and Bernice's relationship, I mean, it's complicated, because Bernice is just historically like not kind to Agnes. And I think some of it is Bernice's own shame, you know, because Agnes comes to high school and she's being picked on, and now she's got the name and she's attached to Bernice, and Bernice, who's also a teenager and, you know, and is socializing and being socialized in ways that make community like so important, like tries to distance herself in order to have some kind of social safety from Agnes's like fate as an outcast. And so it results in her not treating Agnes well. And I think that's also a reality. I think that is a reality of you know, siblings who for whom that's a thing, right? Like sometimes the sibling becomes a protector, and then sometimes they become part of the mob, right? And in Bernice and Agnes's case, like that is what Bernice chooses to do. I think, you know, what I think about often is like, what happens to them the day after?
Yes, because I was so shocked that I knew she wasn't going with Prime, but I was shocked that she chose her mother, just like Prime saying, like they had not given you any love. Like you're choosing them, and in his mind, he was offering this whole package. Like, I love you, I'm this. And how do you choose these people who don't care about you, has shown you that you don't care about you? So that was surprising to me. But in regards to, you were talking about how Bernice, like, I think that's taking it back to grieving. I think her resentment and all her walls that she put up, and all the tension between her is part of her. That's what her grief did to her. Her grieving of her sister and how she treated her. That was instead of acceptance, it was resentment, and behind that is always hurt, right? Behind that.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, behind what all their tension and all their arguing was the hurt that Agnes felt. And that's part of the grieving.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I don't know. I just saw a comment from someone saying that like, oh wait, that was about Suzette. But like, I had a really lovely book club chat with a group of women who all have albinism, and they live in proximity to each other, so they do a lot of stuff together, but they all read the book together. And a couple of them were like, oh, you know, like Agnes should have never went back home. Like, screw them people.
Yes.
middle finger to him. She should have left, but and I think that that's a valid reaction, because like in that way Prime is right. But I think I think what Agnes is looking for is a reconciliation of those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And the possibility of reconciliation, as slim as it may be, for her is more enticing than this very easy, very cutely packaged kind of love.
A
Right.
pseudo, glass case. She knew that it wasn't real, but
Right.
she
Mm-hmm.
needed to go back to, if she had the sense that, okay, I'm not a full person, I'm floundering. In order for me to get my life up from the ground up, I'm gonna have to mend these relationships. Basically.
Yep. Or see if it's possible, right?
Yeah.
Like, it may not be possible. Because I don't think the mother was a very good mediator. Like,
At all. When she was eating while they
Mhm.
were arguing, they said she
Right.
just eat stuff in her face and just looking at what? No, stop them. Say something.
Yeah. Like, and so I do think it'll be a difficult road, but I think that the possibility of something that's real, even if it's sort of wrangled from Bernice and her hatefulness, um, I think it is more enticing than like nothing at all. Like,
Yeah.
or this very sort of plastic love that Prime is offering. It's easy to get, but it doesn't necessarily feel real. It doesn't even necessarily feel attached to her. It's attached to this idea of this perfect family that he didn't get with his son's mother.
Yes.
Like
And
yes.
that's
So
his
he
story.
is.
That was his story.
Mm-hmm.
That was his story. That was in his imagination. This is what he needed to be whole, but that wasn't necessarily what she needed.
No. Yeah. Or even what he needed, because I think he's setting himself up for more Agneses who might be more willing to stay and exploit him for what he offers.
Prime needs counseling. That's what Prime needs. Prime needs counseling.
Yeah, he did.
I want to go back to Benita. I was sort of upset with Suzette's. That's what you were referring to. Best friend termed differently. I felt having a real best friend is something we as women really need. I felt let down.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say that I appreciated. I understood her. Like, she was from their kindergarten, third grade. She was her friend, and it grew into something else. And she never. I appreciated the fact that she never brought that to Suzette, right? And then when Suzette started feeling for Donnie, she stepped back. Now her stepping back may have looked like not a real friendship, but that was her feelings. But she also knew that Suzette needed to figure it out on her own. So when they had after her and Donnie get together and they're having these interactions, she's upset, and it's coming out as venom, and it's coming out as she's uncaring, but that's real life, right? So I didn't feel let down. I felt like these are two characters, but Miss Bonita felt let down. So let's talk about that.
No. I think it's a good point, because I do think that up until the very end, or somewhere close to the end, Fredrina seems like the perfect friend.
Yeah.
But like you said, that's real life. I have had friendships that were affirming and supportive and all of the things. But then as I grew and evolved, I came to understand that there was other stuff happening that was not healthy, that was not affirming, that was not, like, people will switch up on you. Like, real, like when, like, some, like, I think it is the thing that can often end marriages, end friendships, end professional relationships, is like when people start to change. If the other person in the relationship does not know how to handle that change, there is always some kind of trouble. And I think that that's the issue. It's not that Drina was a bad friend. It is that things had been a specific way almost since they were babies, right? Like, very young. And Fredrina had always come out as the protector, as the, like, I'm your friend, I'm your only friend, I'm the person who takes you to the mall and who does all of the things for you. But then when Suzette starts to want more, Fredrina starts to wonder, like, well, where do I fit in?
Exactly.
Like, who am I? Who am I here if you're not the person that you were? And people don't always handle that well, even when they're good people, even when they mean well, even when they are good friends. They don't always handle those changes well. And so I don't necessarily see those changes as some kind of like indicator of Fredrina's not being a real friend. I think she just struggled with the reality that the friend she made, 15 years ago was not the friend that she was getting at 20.
And it's akin to how she was growing up, how her parents were treating her, and how that relationship had to change. Friendships evolve; they die or they evolve, right? So
they do.
This was a story about that turning point in their relationship. Writing on Enough says, love isn't always erotic. It's often romantic, and it's often it's often about intimacy too, right? All relationships.
But I think that actually ties into what we're talking about too, because sometimes our romantic notions for each other don't fit the reality of the person we're standing in front of, right? That we have these romantic notions. I'm going to be your protector. I'm going to be your savior. I'm going to be your best friend. I'm going to be your only friend. And this other person is like, I actually want more.
Yeah.
And then, what do you do with that? Is that a rejection? Right. Are they saying that you're not enough? Like, how do you handle when your romantic notions about somebody are not what they want from you?
Right. Even with Maple, right? Because Maple was trying to make Chad her romantic. Every time she was like, I don't understand this. She was kind of, backing away. Like, this is not what I wanted from this. Every time they were intimate together, she was questioning, like, okay, she was pushing for this, but he was trying to give her that. Right?
Yeah.
So even in that instance.
Yeah.
H&D abroad. Let's unpack the daughter, mother, grandmother dynamic, acceptance, toxic relationship, and the new road sis has to choose. How you broke it down with mom who lost her daughter. Powerful.
Nana.
Listen,
I didn't like Nana.
I was like, in reading the book, I had to put it down. Like, she need to be slapped. So where is the grandma? Who are you talking to? Like, I know this is your grieving. Talk about grief, right? I know you are grieving too, but this is her daughter. She lost her daughter. You are being, when we talk about respectability, but it was, okay, your characters are speaking to you, yes. But Maple was out of pocket. Let's talk about that.
She was. Yeah, you do not threaten to throw your grandma in a lake. This is true. And then I wouldn't do it.
But look, I needed Nana to be like a for real hood grandma. Like, who you talking to? It didn't happen.
Yeah. No, but she wasn't that. She was deeply invested in respectability politics, so she wasn't gonna do that. But Maple was wrong. But I understood where she was coming from. Because I didn't like Nana. I couldn't stand Nana, actually. But you know what? I think that what's really lovely about that story, I'm also really interested, and I think this also goes back to my doctoral work, is like, I'm interested in other mothers, and Miss Dee sort of steps in and becomes like this the version of Nana that Maple needed in the moment, who was also grieving the loss of a daughter, who deeply understood Maple. She wasn't like, doing the weird stuff around albinism. Like, she just kind of accepted her, and just, and it was such a beautiful moment. And that was a full circle moment when it came to Maple and Nana, because Nana was not what Maple needed. And she failed at a lot of stuff. And she was not a good grandmother.
Well, she says Grand was insufferable. She's agreeing.
I agree. I did not like Nana. I didn't like Nana at all. And I can't even tell you if I'm rooting for Nana. I mean, I hope they repair the relationship, whatever. But she needs some therapy. She needs to take some classes. She needs to learn how to talk to people and talk about people. But I agree.
I was initially like, why is he taking her to his mama's house? Like, this is a little fast. But then when she got there and they had the conversation, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I think he didn't want to go by himself because it had been so long since he'd been.
Right.
And I think he thought Miss Dee Dee was probably going to say something about that, and she probably would have.
Because that's why I was like, this is not your mother. This is her mother. How is this going to work? How is this?
Almost mother-in-law.
But then when they got there, I was like, oh, okay. This is
yeah. But I think Miss Dee Dee was a real one. Like, I don't think Miss Dee Dee would have come, weirdly. Like, it had been, by then it had been. I don't remember how young, how old the daughter was, but it had been at least a few years. Yeah, like 6 or 7 years since the. So I don't know that it would have been realistic for her to have been angry about like the prospect of a love interest or anything like that. Even though that's kind of not what they were really. Like, I think that Chad's interest in Maple is just like, here's another person who is grieving. I'm sorry, I just read that's why I hate the Southern idea of Big Mama's automatically being a god and getting the pass in all situations is traumatized. I mean, it's really true. Like, I am writing right now about my great grandmother who was very, very complicated. And I learned some stuff about her relationship with me that I didn't know about until I was in my 40s. And I was like, oh, she did what? She did what to me?
Oh, no.
And so, like, I think that, like, they aren't all, but then they too are complicated. Like, I have when I found out about some of the things that she had done to me, I was just like, middle finger, like you.
And they didn't, but they waited to tell you until you were grown. Very good. No, very good. Okay.
They did. Well, and you know what? It's so fun because I think one of the reasons I became a writer is because I come from a family of brilliant storytellers. Okay. But they are also strategically silent about things. There are things that you do not talk about. You do not talk about. And if you bring it up, everybody gets angry. And they're like, why are you talking about that? That happened in the past. Oh, yes, very much so. Very much so. And some of it's for good reason because some of the things that happen are terrible.
It's traumatizing. Right. They don't want to bring trauma.
It's traumatizing for them to remember it. And that is how they avoid being in pain. And so I do understand that. So writing for me became like a way for me to ask questions that I knew I couldn't ask the people in my family. It became a way for me to try to figure out things on my own. Mm-hmm. But actually, so the stuff came out just during a random like brunch at my mama's house, and I was just like, "What?"
As it always does. You just sitting there like, "Wait a minute, what?" Because they think you heard the story before. You like, "Wait a second, yes."
Yeah, I was ready to fight. But you know what's interesting though is like. My great-grandmother was not a fan of me, but you know what she was? She was an extemporaneous writer.
Wow.
She could write church speeches off the dome. I have a memory, I'm gonna date myself here, but back in the day, you could eavesdrop on the phone. If you had another phone in the house, you hold the little prongs down, you can get on the phone and eavesdrop. So I was doing that. I was maybe 6 or 7. I was curious. Yes. And what was happening on the phone was that my mom was on a 3-way call with one of her, play cousins from play cousins she grew up with.
Right.
And my great grandmother was dictating a speech to this cousin who had to give a speech for some kind of church event. And she was just off the dome.
Going off the dome. Wow.
Off the dome. Talking. And I don't know why I heard that. I don't know why I stayed on the phone because it wasn't interesting. Like, I was on the phone for gossip. I'm trying to figure out, you know what I mean? It wasn't gossip. It was just, but I was like, you know what? I think that was providential because as complicated as my feelings toward her are, and apparently as complicated as her feelings were toward me, she gave me something.
Yes.
Right? That's the only other person in my family that I knew was interested in writing. There were many artists, right? People could grow stuff, they could cook, they could make stuff, they could play instruments.
But a writer.
But writer specifically, she's the only one I know of. Wow. And so in spite of the complications between us, I feel like I inherited something from her. And I'm a little petty because I'm like, baby girl.
It's in the DNA.
Doing what you tried. But that's not generous. But it is true, right? That like that she is a part of my legacy, whether I want to admit to it or not.
Yes.
It's complicated. It's complicated.
Families are complicated. To H&D's her comment, right? To unpack the mother-daughter, grandmother dynamic, all of that, toxic relationships, what they give you, what they don't, what they try to instill with you, what they're trying to protect you from, right? Even if they think, even if you feel it's wrong, or you feel like they're trying to raise you in the world that they think, this is what protect you from the harms of their world, right? And their generation. So a lot of that comes from that. But all intergenerational between women, between Black women, is a whole thing. You can write just reams and reams of books based on that alone.
Oh yeah. Patricia Hill Collins talks about it in Black Feminist Thought, like that, like when a mother is trying to prepare her daughter to like navigate these interlocking systems of race and gender and class, and like how traumatizing just the preparation can be, but she's trying to prepare you to avoid being destroyed by these systems that are intent on destroying you. It's a difficult space to be in, even when you love your offspring. Right. And their offspring. My great grandmother was perhaps not that in all the ways.
Right.
But so her situation is also complicated by her own, by the issues in her own life, her own bitterness, her own struggles. So it's a hard space to be in. And I think, the thing that I wanted to say about that is like, yeah, there was a period when I was just like, you are not a part of the pantheon of ancestors that I respect and admire and that I make space for. But over time I've softened there because one, this is a Black woman growing up in the gym, coming of age in the Jim Crow South. Her whole life, including her marriage, was dictated by the laws of her state, and also by the power of people in the place where she lived, like the people who employed her husband, the people that she bought food from, the people that she went to for medical care. And so I have to give her grace, even if I don't agree with all of the things that she did, even though some of those things were just devastating and ripped the family apart. I have to offer her grace for that, and I have to acknowledge her for the ways that her gifts were passed down to me. And so I have become softer in my treatment of her. But you can still call a thing a thing.
Yes, and that's what H&D is saying. The families around the main characters, the things they did to protect them up to the avoidance was maddening. It really was. Curtis. I stepped back and tried to think about it as a parent, a daughter, and a love seeker. And even like when you talk about Nana and Maple, like what her mother was doing, as our grandparents, church going grandparents was like, what? No, my daughter was not that. No, she was not.
Right.
All of that. So I knew where she was coming from. But that was the dynamic, right? And tried to protect her own, not only her image and what her daughter and her granddaughter, the lives that they live. That's what the main part was.
It was, but families are
the Black church would get you right with them Easter speeches.
I wish I remember what it was about, but the thing I remember was how effortlessly it was. It was almost as if, I don't know. It was magic. Dare I say the word? It was magic. It was a magical moment, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know what pushes us, from one art to another art, but the fact that she had the power to do that, also given how terrible she was, like like that's the person writing the Easter speech, but like. The fact that she could do it and she could do it so effortlessly, can't deny that as a part of my artistic heritage.
Your makeup, exactly.
Yeah. It is as important as the things that I learned in school, that impulse to make in this particular medium. Because I could have been a painter or a dancer or something. I could have been something else. But I think that the gifts. I do think that we receive gifts from our ancestors, as complicated as they may be.
Y'all, we are 2 hours in. It's 4:00. We started at 2:00. I'm not gonna hold you, Destiny. I'm not gonna hold you. I know we had questions about writing life. Maybe we can ask her back at another time. But we want to thank you. We want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. This has been great. This has been a wonderful conversation.
I hope so. Thank you for having me. I never know, because sometimes I ramble. I'm like, oh God,
No, we like
what did I say?
We like the rambling. This was great.
Yeah.
We covered everything that I wanted to cover. Bonita said this was wonderful. Thank you, Destiny.
Thank you.
And for us just to be, this is a small reading community in the little reading nook on the social scale. So we want to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm always here to talk about books and writing and all of the things. If you do have one writing question, I'd be happy to answer it.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. It's Sunday. I'm not gonna do anything but get up and go eat some fish. So you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
I'm not super hungry. Yeah, I can wait a few minutes before I heat up my plate.
I know Bonita had a question. Let me go back up to her question. See, that's why I needed Kiyoki here to log these questions. Okay. Bonita says, after the book, a little about Destiny's poetry, where it came from. Yeah. So let me hold up her book. Mm-hmm. Negotiations. She is not only a fiction writer, she is a huge poetry prize winning writer. So this is her book, Negotiations. I will put it's under this video, and I will also put a link in the chat. But to answer Bonita's Pen's question.
Okay. Poetry, where did it come from? So poetry is my first home. That's my first home in literature. I was trained, I have an MFA, and it's in poetry. I wrote a poetry thesis. I was not trained to be a fiction writer. Of course, I was a book lover as a kid. Loved reading fiction, loved losing myself in it and all of that stuff. But poetry is my first home. People always ask, like, when did you know you were going to be a writer? And for me, it was one day I was watching a cartoon. I was watching the Batman cartoon. Like they had like a resurgence in the mid-90s. They had like the Batman cartoon. And he had quoted lines from a William Blake poem, and I was watching it. And then when the episode went off, I wrote my first poem. And it was the first time I had that, I don't know, that feeling that you get when you write, or you're just kind of in another space, a liminal space. And so that's where I started, and that's what I thought I would always be. So the poetry is the poetry came from childhood. I don't know, like the impulse, the love for language, and I don't know how it went in that direction. I think that was the first poem I remember writing, and I would have been in like the 7th grade maybe, so it would have been maybe 11 or 12. And like that was the moment for me where I was like, I want to do this. I want to do some form of this for the rest of my life. So poetry, I always say it's my first home in literature. It's my first love. I will always go back to it. I have a poetry book out on submission right now. I'm always going to do both, do everything. I do fiction, nonfiction, poetry, book reviews.
She's an author extraordinaire. That's what I put in the description.
Thank you for the extraordinaire. Yes. Thank you. But I do it all, and I love it. I love writing. I feel my freest, my safest, my most hopeful when I'm writing, and poetry has always been a big part of that, and it always will be. A lot of times people, when you start to write in other genres, and the poet Elizabeth Acevedo has talked about this, like people will tend to sort of, I think because people just want to easily categorize you. It's like, oh, you're a poet who has turned to fiction, and it's like, no, like this is all a part of my canon, and you can look at my poetry and see things that happen that come up in the fiction. They are linked.
The best fiction has elements of poetry in it, like all of it. The best fiction to me, is you're playing with words, your wordplay, the ideas behind it. Yes, the metaphor, all of that is all one, just like you said earlier about genres, like they want to categorize, just like music. They want to put you in this hole and have you, stay there. But if you're talented, you're talented. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and if you love it, you love it. And I think that, if I had been that kind of self-editor that I was, prior to like 2016, I would have never tried to write fiction.
Yeah,
Because, I think I would have just told myself like, well, what are you doing?
yeah,
But I started doing it because I was unemployed and I had started watching my best friend at the time loved the show Power, and she kept trying to tell me to watch it. And so like I was unemployed, so I was like, I got time to do it now. Started watching it, and after every episode on the on-demand version, they would talk to Courtney Kemp about a scene structure and tension building and narrative and all that stuff. And that's how I got interested in it. And I was like, well, let me see if I can write a story and see what happens. And so I think I think the thing that can happen when people try to box you in is that it kills your curiosity. And so I'll try any piece of writing. I'll try it. I'll do listen. I have a specific dream about writing a specific screenplay with a specific person. I won't name names. But I'm like, hell, if I'm given the opportunity, hell yeah, I would try it. Hell yeah, I would try it. And if I fail at it, when I'm an old lady in my little rocking chair on my porch, I can be like, I tried it.
Yes. Listen, my lit life, my YouTube space is all about not putting ourselves in boxes. Like, try everything. Mm-hmm. We are on this earth for a minute period of time. And what Dion Cole said, he said, we have 20 summers, 30 summers left. We have this amount of time left. Like, stop putting yourself, and don't put yourself in the box. If other people want to do that, then yes, please. But that's not your business. If other people want to place you, it's not your business. Write whatever you want to write, sing whatever you want to sing, do it all.
Yeah. Do it all. Yeah. You can say you did it. You can say you tried. I do not want to get to the end of my life and regret not ever trying to be who I know I'm supposed to be. If I fail at it, I can at least tell God I tried. I'm like, hey, I did what I could. So yeah, absolutely. But yeah, love poetry. Will always be a poet.
And that question was from Bonita. She's one of our in-house poets as well.
Hey.
Saying, yes, I feel you. H&D said, I love seeing us in print. Yes. One of my questions is, you have been doing this professionally full-time for a long time, right? What do you still love about writing or about the writing life? Like what because I know you can get burnt out for people who have been doing it for a certain time, especially with rejection or things you have to making money, surviving as a full-time writer. So what keeps you here? What do you love about writing?
The work. I love the characters. I fall in love with my characters. I have crushes on everybody. It's messy. I have a crush on Donnie.
Listen, I made a note. We passed it out, but my note was when we were talking. No, wait, stop. My note when we were talking about Black love with men, my note was, I am looking for a 50-year-old Donnie right now. That's my right. Crush. Yes.
Yeah, I had a crush on Donnie. I had tender feelings toward Chad. The characters that I'm working with right now, I have crushes on all of them except the main character, because she's a little nutty. But like I love world building, and I love telling stories, and I love that feeling that I get when I've started something. I mean, I had a crush on Donnie too. He's a good one. Like, we
all did. Like, I'm like, where is the 50? Let me find me a dog. He was so caring and so like doing shit without her asking, like taking the initiative. Like, I'm a helpmate, baby. Come on. Like
a help, yes, right, but not things that were so far off. When he was just sort of driving around, and when he starts feeding the ducks, I think what I love are his little gestures, like when he feeds the ducks oatmeal because he's like, bread's not good for him, or when she comes out, she's looking for her dad when she comes out to like the shed on their property, and he hands her she's being a little like, where my daddy at, and he hands her the mask. He hands her a mask to put on because he's standing. And so like just those little gestures, him,
like staying away, like you too young, girl, you too young, like let me stay away from you. You know what I mean?
And he's also an old soul too. Like, I think I love that about him, is that he's young, but he's like an old soul. He's been through some stuff. He's learned some stuff the hard way. Yeah, so but I don't know. I love that. I love meeting characters and falling for them and wanting to spend time with them. I love that moment when it's almost like driving, like you're driving a long distance and you get into that rhythm where
Yeah.
you're just like, you're at the speed you want to be at, you're
Yeah.
maneuvering around the big
Like the
beasels and you're
zone. Like
just,
the zone. Yeah.
yeah, you taking it on in, as my mom say, like take it in. When you get that,
In
you're
the
in that
pocket,
drive.
especially when you're driving. Yeah, you in the pocket.
You're
Yeah.
in a pocket. Yeah, yeah. You I love that feeling. I love when the characters get to go out into the world. I love people's reactions to them. I love everything about making this art. I mean, well, maybe not everything. I mean, it can be tedious sometimes. It can be hard when you're struggling with an idea. I'm not a person who writes every day. I don't, if I don't, like right now, I haven't been writing, but I've written 2 books. Like essentially, maybe not in the past 12 months, but I have finished them in the past 12 months, right? And so I feel like it's okay. It's okay if I don't have anything to say right now. Come back. Like it's okay
Yeah.
to have periods of flowering and then periods of rest. But sometimes it's hard when you do have an idea and you do know that it needs to be put down and you're not quite sure how to fix it. And so I'm walking around the house talking to myself and like talking about the characters while I'm making dinner and talking about them with my friends. And sometimes that can be a struggle. The rejection is hard, like making a living is hard. But I love making this kind of art. It feeds me. I don't know. I love it. I wish there was a better way to describe how it makes me feel, but it just makes me feel alive and free and purposeful. And I come back for that feeling. That's the thing that brings me back. And the characters and their stories and the
Mhm.
ways that they solve the problems of their own worlds. I love spending time with them, like it's a wonderful experience.
um, and we appreciate all that you put out, the stories that you put out. In regard to that, like if someone is trying to get on, and not even an emerging, a novice writing, right, a writer who wants to be daring. We talked about at the beginning of this conversation, like you're bold, you're daring. What makes your story so great, that your characters are relatable. Even with certain things like talking like we talk, right? Talking
Mhm.
normally how we talk. You don't put any airs on in a lot of in these stories, in this book especially. Um, when beginning writers try to do that, they get some pushback, right? They get pushback on slang, they get pushback on sex scenes, they get
Mhm.
pushback on all of these things. So you're at a
Mhm.
different stage. What is your advice on managing this for beginning writers? Managing what you want to put out, your stories that you want to put out, and what
Mhm.
publishers or editors are accepting from writers.
I think, at the risk of sounding like an after school special, there's a home for everything.
Okay.
It's gonna find its place. If you believe, well, first of all, before we even get to that point, right? When you're just at the page, all of those voices and all of those, people got to leave the room. The only people who should be in the room are you and your characters and God, or
You're right. You're magnificent.
your
Right.
your
Yeah, of course.
deity of choice.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, and that's where the work is made. Now, once it's made, you find trusted people who can read it, who give you feedback. And I think this is a point where something really nebulous comes in. It's called writer's instinct. You got to know who's a safe person to share your work with. There are
Yes.
people that I love and they don't see my work because they're not safe. They're not safe. They're not good critiquers of my work.
Yes.
They do not give good advice, and I can love them and be like, "No, I'm not gonna let you touch my work."
Right.
Like,
Right. So
right.
when
So,
you
like,
find when you find somebody who you respect and who values your work, and y'all, you keep those people. Keep those people.
mhm,
I never said how I met Destiny, but we were in these literary streets at a workshop. But you when you align with authenticity, and really supportive and motivating and encouraging women, keep those relationships open,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And even in those relationships, sometimes people love you and they don't always give you good advice.
Yes.
Learn how to separate the workshop advice there are things that people say that are incredibly useful. There may be 2 things they say that are not useful.
Yes.
Learn how to discern what is good for your work. And I think those instincts are honed by spending time with your work, spending time with your characters, spending time with your poems, spending time with other books and seeing how other people do it, and ask yourself, is that how I would do it? Would I want to do it differently? You know what I mean? Like, get familiar with what makes you tick as a writer. And when you get familiar with your voice, your characters, your stories, how you want to tell things, what you want to write about, it becomes much easier to discern who's a good fit to be reading your work and giving you feedback on it. And after you've done all that and it goes out into the world, you are going to get rejected. You are going to get rejected, right? That does not mean
it's
anything.
Not good. Yeah.
Yeah. Every person I admire who is famous and successful has a rejection story. And sometimes they be wild. It'd be like, man, 35 production companies said no, and then this one place said yes, and now I done made $1 billion off the movie. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like
The Bluest Eye. I thought one of my Morrison, it got turned down 80 something times, rejected, and one person said yes. And that's, you know what I mean, when you think about stories like
it's a classic.
Yeah.
Now it's a classic. Yeah. And when the reviews of The Bluest Eye were so strange, like, when is she gonna talk about race? Really?
Right. Right.
Did you read the title of the book? Like, it's, like, sometimes the feedback that you get is just not accurate to who you are. And I have found that the more time I spend with myself and my work, the easier it is to discern, that discernment. You can discern who is safe, who is not. And then among the safe people, what advice is useful, what advice is not useful.
And and I want to make a difference. There's a fine line between, especially as a novice writer, there's a fine line between you thinking you know everything, right, about your work, and taking criticism, especially from someone who you may regard as a mentor, somebody who's been doing it much longer than you. So we're not saying when Maya says great advice, take the advice you need and leave the rest. For you may want to, once you have a few workshop experiences under your belt, right?
That's true.
Because then your voice, your voice, what your story is saying, you get a confidence. And everybody's not going to agree. You look at, if you go to a workshop, you're getting 10 other people in the room. So 10 people have opinions about what you wrote, right? So yes, you take what you feel is valuable and you leave the rest in that instance. So it is a game plan, but this is true. To know what you're bringing to the table, what the intentions in your words and your work, and overall what is the story. If it's messing with the moral of your story and what the story you're trying to tell, right? Then there's a difference.
Yeah. I agree. Because, sometimes I have to sit on feedback, sometimes people are like, oh, I was talking about earlier when my editor was like, I think Agnes needs to go home. And I was like, man, I don't feel like doing all that. But of course, but I sat with that. Yes. I sat with that. And I realized that in the back of my mind, I felt the same way.
Yeah.
Right. So learn how to sit with information too. Learn how to sit with it and process it. Your first reaction is not always your best reaction. Because sometimes critiques can hurt. They can hurt. Now, there's a difference between something that hurts you in a moment and you take time and you realize the spirit in which it was given and you analyze it in terms of how it could potentially strengthen the work, and something that's harmful, right? Something that's designed to harm how you think about yourself as a writer, how you think about the work. Right. And I feel like for me, historically, there has been, after sitting with it, there's a clear line between those two. Right. If you're trying to take down me as a writer, that's not helpful advice.
Right. If your inner voice will tell you what's happening.
This is true. Which is why it's important to sit with yourself and to sit with your work. And also, I just want to say this, because you hear this sort of thrown around a lot. We talk about writing as therapy.
Yeah.
It can be, but there's some stories you have to be healthy enough to tell.
Yes.
And being healthy enough to tell them is not always about, it is about the work itself, but it is also about how you navigate the revision and the mentorship and all of the things that become a part of that work, right? Because if you're not in a healthy enough space to take criticism, right? Like healthy, constructive criticism, that's an issue. You got to get
a fight, and then everything will become a fight. You're fighting yourself. You're fighting the editors. Yes.
If you have issues with believing everybody is against you, that's gonna come up in feedback, right? Everybody's not an enemy. You know what I mean? And so I think being well enough and healthy enough to work on a thing, especially if it's touching on things that are deeply personal,
whether it's deeply personal or a hot topic like religion, like sex, like things that we've been talking about during this.
Sexual violence, writing about that, it's hard work. Like, I'll tell you
anything.
I'll tell you I love it, but that don't mean it's easy. You know what I mean?
You have to be able to you have to have the skills to break it down in a narrative, so that it's not coming off as a lecture, so that it is storytelling. It's all of these things play a part.
Right. It's not didacticism. It is you crafting a narrative. Yes. Those are things I had to learn. I did an interview a couple of months ago with Douglas Kearney, who's a poet and a librettist. And he said, like, somebody asked him, like, well, what's your advice that you would give to, like, young writers, like a teenage writer? And he was like, man, I had to grow into the person I needed to be to write some of the stuff I've been writing in recent years. He was like, sometimes you have to mature to a point where you can actually do certain kinds of work. And I think that's also good advice. Like, sometimes you're not ready to tell a certain story. It doesn't mean you should stop writing. It just means that, like, that story may be for you to write in your 30s or your 40s or your 50s. There is no deadline for, like, how fast you get a thing out. Sometimes you got to become the person that you need to be in order to tell the story with a certain level of detachment and objectivity, even if it's something that's really close to your heart, even if it's something that is a big part of your experience. You
have to develop into the writer, right? Into the writer,
and to the writer that you need to be.
The writer that's the skill set that you have to dive into that story a lot of times.
Yeah, and we do live in a shake and bake culture where, there are 19-year-olds who are like, I just bought my first house and I'm a millionaire, and that's wonderful stuff. But a lot of us need time and space and but I think that also, which is another one of my soapboxes, is like, stop thinking you old because when you turn 30, like, what? Yeah. It is a privilege. So many people in my family, and this is a part of my family's trauma, but so many people in my family died young, early. One of my aunts died at 38. And when I got to 38, I was just like, man, like, is this it? It is a privilege to live long enough to see yourself evolve.
Experience, yes.
Yeah, with experience, and it is a tribute to my ancestors for me to be happy to be at the age that I am. A lot of them didn't make it this far, and I am making it because they made it as far as they did. And it is an insult to them for me to think that because I was not a millionaire at 30, that my life is not meaningful.
And that there's not life to live. There's not life to live after a certain age. Like,
oh my gosh,
her first book, she didn't publish it until 42, right? There are other examples of that, but thinking that you have to accomplish something by a certain age,
and that you're a failure if you haven't.
Yes. So it's coming up before. I'm just going to take 2 more questions already in the chat. Y'all don't put any more. We have held this, like the young kids say, I'm not going to hold you. We have held this lady hostage. Bonita says, amen, amen. The women in my family live long lives. Yes.
Yeah, that's a blessing.
So really quickly, Khadijah's question. What character has inspired you the most in your personal life? That's a good question.
You mean my character or anybody's character?
Anybody's, I'm assuming. I'm assuming. Khadijah, clarify that if you're still here. What character has inspired you? I'm going to say anybody's character.
Anybody's character. Oh gosh, I think the book, one of the books that for me was most transformative for me as a writer is Edwidge Danticott's Breath, Eyes, Memory. So like Sophie Keiko. Yeah, Sophie
Yes.
Keiko. She went through a lot, and I don't know that she's okay at the end of the book, but she survived. Um, and she, and she has she is carrying on like her family line with her own
Yeah.
child. And
Yeah.
so like I just yeah, because I think when I read that book I was like, yeah, I definitely want to be a writer. I was like 18 and I was just starting college, and I was like, yeah, this is the life I want. And so I think that like that
So you answered the
I think that
overall. You answered
yeah,
overall. She says your
yeah.
character.
Okay, and of my characters, I love Suzette a lot. I love Suzette a lot. And I like that I like, like how we talked about her as sort of, not being a college graduate yet, or like not having this sort of like, this international life experience, right? That she's basically like lived in the same city and kind of moved around in the same city in very small ways for most of her life, but she's perceptive, and she sees that there's something else out there, and she's no longer willing to settle for what she's been given, even though she's been given a lot. She's very comfortable. Her life is very comfortable, but her willingness to forego comfort for the possibility of a life where she gets to live as herself, I think is really inspiring. I think that's sometimes a choice you make as an artist, right? Like, I could stay at this cushy job,
Yes.
but am I going to be happy? Am I going to really feel alive? What am I willing to give up in order to live the life I want? I think Suzette's story asks that question.
And what is pushing you to change, right? You can't evolve unless you change.
Yep. And every evolution costs you something. You know what I mean? Yeah, it ain't cheap.
Ma'am,
it is not cheap.
That's a separate conversation. Khadijah says, thank you. I have one more, then we're gonna let this lady go. And my computer is down. Question.
Yeah.
Oh, this was because I had this noted too. When there's time, maybe on Facebook, please give us some workshop recommendations.
Okay. I guess meaning.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you have any workshops coming up?
So I think I might be teaching for poets and writers in the fall. Okay. I haven't pitched my idea yet on it's because it's supposed to be a poetry workshop, which I haven't taught specifically in a while. I've been teaching a lot of fiction stuff, but so that maybe, but workshops that I would recommend, I think Tin House does great workshops. They do one-off things that you can take on a Saturday morning. I've taught those. They do, the week-long workshop in the summer. I highly recommend that. That was like one of my favorite workshop experiences. So I think Tin House is a good place. Poets and Writers offers good workshops. There's a really cool place that I worked with last year called Anaphora Arts. I think it's based in Southern California. Yeah, okay. Anaphora. And they do a lot of really good like mentoring programs and master classes. So I would recommend them. Let me see. Also, check out the places that are with you locally, right? Like, I know that there's like, like if you live in New York, there are places. If you live in Boston, I think there's, I want to say there's Grub Street in Boston, if I'm not mistaken. So like different places will do, have, in-person stuff that you could certainly do. Maybe just checking it out in your city and like seeing what's around. I've definitely lived in cities like that. One place that is both in person and online is the Porch. Is out of Nashville where I used to live, but the Porch does lots of online workshops. They do in-person ones too if you live close by. But that's a place that I would recommend. They bring in a lot of really good writers, especially with the online stuff, like people who don't necessarily live in the city, but there are also a ton of writers who live in Nashville. So you good either way. I've heard, it seems like the King in Review Writers Workshop, which I've never been to, but I've seen folks whose work I admire teaching there, but also taking the classes there. It seems like they had a really good time. I think they just ended one maybe a couple of weeks ago. Folks seem like they had a good time. That seems like a good place to check out. I know I'm probably forgetting some places. I've never been to like Bread Loaf, so I can't necessarily speak to that. The Sewanee,
especially us, you gave them enough to start research.
Okay, cool. I've heard good things about Kimbilio for like fiction writers. There are good mentorship programs too. Like I work with a program called Paraplus. They do good mentor programs. So sometimes having a good mentor and just being able to talk to them about your writing one-on-one is also, it is good in ways that workshops, may not be able to offer when you've got a large cohort. So
Yeah.
looking out for mentorship opportunities is good. Looking out for workshops is good, whether it's a one day or a multi-day. If if you're a caregiver and you can't travel, try some of those Saturday morning workshops online if there are places that offer that. And also if there are writers that you admire, see where they're teaching and see if you can get into those places. Yeah. So
But I do agree, one-on-one mentorship it helps a lot. It helped me a lot when starting out, especially when I couldn't get into some of the workshops. Out and just saying, hey, do you take on mentees? Do you offer beta reading? Like I would, any of that. Some help, any support that you can find out here is great. But we'll put a list of the places that she mentioned in the group as well.
Cool.
Thus far, I want to remind everyone, if you are still here, thank you. Please like and share this video. Please subscribe if you like this content. And if you're here, you're a member of Read and Wander Book Club, but we appreciate you. If you don't have a physical copy of Nobody's Business, I'm sorry, Nobody's Magic.
That's a good title too, though.
Nobody's Magic. There's the link is under this video. I think Nobody's Business is a movie or something. And then I put it in the link as well. Also, Destiny has signed copies of Nobody's Magic. If you want a signed copy, let us know and we will direct you to her email to see how you get that. But yes, beautiful book cover. I think it is. Chanel says this was so wonderful. Thank you, Bonita. We are overwhelmed and thankful. Destiny.
Thank you. This was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
It was. This is the energy that we like. We love interaction. But instead of me and Keoka talking to you individually, we want to bring everybody in on the talk, the chat, so everybody can give their 2 cents, ask their questions, have a one-on-one with you, and get that firsthand experience.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'm happy to oblige. Like I said, if you doing something with my book, I'm gonna try to be in the room because take care of my kids.
Yes, it was overwhelmingly well received. And just thank you, lady. I hope to see you again soon in the lit streets.
Me too.
But you enjoy your time with your family next week.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all too. I'm going to be ending this. Destiny, stay with me for a second. Please like and subscribe to the channel. See y'all later.